It wasn't just a canceled trip. It was a perfectly staged illusion that collapsed so fast it exposed something far darker underneath the story that looked like reconciliation on the surface but felt like manipulation the moment you looked closer. Because how do you go from hope to total collapse in just 21 hours unless the fall was already planned?
The plan all along. It was to sort of build King Charles up and Britain to the idea that our king is finally going to get to see his grandchildren again, and then to whip that away from the king.
I've been told that Harry in tears, like his voice breaking when he's been speaking to people on the phone.
I mean, it's a joke.
It's cruel to do to King Charles, to tease him with a potential visit to his grandchildren, and then when Harry doesn't get his way, rip the opportunity away.
Yeah, all of the above, all of the things that you said, Kinsey. It's a tool that he's using to try and leverage getting that security.
Told that Harry is basically retreating into paranoia, severe depression, anxiety, that he's been crying over the...
King Charles hasn't seen his grandchildren in 4 years. Not a video call, not a birthday visit, not a single photograph taken in the same room. Nothing. So when a full itinerary landed in royal reporters' inboxes, real dates, real locations, Archie and Lilibet at Diana's grave for the very first time, he let himself believe it was finally happening. That was the moment everything changed. Not publicly, quietly, internally, because this wasn't rumor anymore. This wasn't speculation stitched together by tabloids desperate for clicks. This was structured, official, precise, and that precision is what makes it so unsettling now. Because someone wanted it to look real. Someone needed it to feel inevitable.
Sheer stupidity. That is the only explanation for the last week and a half or so of news regarding Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's alleged return to the UK. It is sheer unbelievable stupidity, imbecility, idiocracy, so many things, like so many adjectives for being absolutely some of the dumbest people on the face of the planet when at least comes to royal news.
Sources close to the palace said he was genuinely hopeful, not cautiously optimistic. Hopeful in the way a person allows themselves to be when they've spent years trying not to be. It lasted 21 hours, and what came out in the wreckage afterward was bad enough that people who had defended Harry for years finally stopped. 21 hours. That number keeps echoing like a warning, because nothing real falls apart that fast without something deeper breaking underneath it. So what actually happened in that narrow window? What shifted? What triggered the sudden reversal? Here's where the story gets uncomfortable. Nothing changed. Not the security, not the threat level, not the policies, not a single official detail moved.
And then on Friday, just a couple of days ago, so Friday, June 27th, we got an itinerary for them. What event Meghan was supposed to be at. You know, what sort of the plans were. They were going to go visit Diana's gravesite in Althorp, and they were going to go to a hospital together. And then on Saturday, it was, no. Whoopsie daisy. We didn't get the security that we wanted. So yeah, now the kids and Meghan aren't going.
The plan, as it was laid out, read like something from a completely different era. And that plan, it was almost too perfect. Meghan stepping back into the UK spotlight. Harry reconnecting with causes tied to his past. Carefully curated moments designed to rebuild something that had been broken for years. But then came the detail that didn't just complete the picture, it elevated it into something emotionally explosive.
The backdrop was also that poor King Charles has not seen his beloved grandchildren, Archie and Lilibet, for 4 years. They last came, I think, for the Queen's funeral.
Archie and Lilibet visiting Princess Diana's grave for the very first time, accompanied by their parents, the kind of moment that writes itself. The kind of detail that if you were trying to guarantee maximum public emotion and maximum media traction, you would construct almost exactly like this. That's not coincidence, that's strategy. Because when you design a moment that powerful, you're not just planning a visit, you're creating pressure. Emotional pressure, public pressure, the kind that forces reactions, forces decisions, forces outcomes.
Harry and Meghan did decide to announce it to all of the media privately on Friday, and they revealed that Meghan would be visiting a hospital. Of course she would, in her first UK engagement. for 6 years. Here was the reporting in the Pro-Sussex.
King Charles hadn't laid eyes on those two children since the Platinum Jubilee. 4 years of separation reduced to photographs on a screen. 4 years. And suddenly, everything was about to change. Or at least that's what it looked like. That's what it was meant to look like.
Because you don't go and say something like, definitively, we're going to the UK, if you don't know if the security you delusionally think you need is going to be there. If the government says no, which it should have, by the way, you don't say anything until you're sure. And if you're just going to, I think some people think Harry and Meghan just enjoy the chaos.
After everything that came before, Charles was reportedly allowing himself to believe that this might actually be the beginning of something. And for one brief moment, it worked. The narrative held. The world believed. Even the palace seemed to soften. Friday evening, a detailed warm piece about the upcoming Sussex visit. It reads like the opening chapter of something new. But then, the shift. Sudden, violent, impossible to ignore. 21 hours later, security arrangements have fallen apart. Harry is reconsidering bringing Meghan and the children at all, the same trip, now being described as finished before it even started. Two completely different stories. Same trip, same facts, same timeline. So which one was real? Because here's the part nobody can explain away: the security situation didn't change. It was exactly the same before the itinerary was released and after it collapsed. No new threat, no new intelligence, no new decision, nothing. So why release a full, detailed plan if the one condition that could cancel it was never resolved? That's not a mistake. That's a setup. A setup that created anticipation, created emotional investment, created a moment where saying no would feel like loss, not just for the public, but for King Charles himself. Because once hope becomes visible, it becomes leverage. And suddenly the entire story stops being about a visit and starts becoming about control. And just when it seemed like the story couldn't get more chaotic, it twisted into something even more revealing. Because the collapse didn't just end the visit, it exposed a pattern that people had been quietly noticing for years but never fully connected until now. Nigeria, Colombia, high-profile announcements, carefully timed appearances, growing anticipation, and then, without warning, everything falls apart at the exact moment attention peaks. Once might be coincidence, twice raises eyebrows, but over and over again, that starts to look like a method hiding in plain sight. What makes this situation different is how openly the contradictions stacked on top of each other. On one side, the narrative pushed that security made the visit impossible, that conditions were unsafe, that bringing Meghan and the children would be irresponsible. On the other side, reality painted a completely different picture. No heightened threats, no emergency changes, no sudden risks that hadn't already existed for years. The exact same framework Harry had operated under every single time he stepped onto British soil since walking away. So the question becomes unavoidable: if the conditions were always the same, why did they suddenly become unacceptable only after the plan was made public? Because once the itinerary was out, it did something powerful. It made the visit feel real to the world. It made it feel close. It gave people something to emotionally invest in, especially the image of King Charles finally standing in the same room as his grandchildren after years of distance. And that image mattered. It wasn't just a family moment. It was symbolic. Healing, closure, the kind of moment the monarchy desperately needed to soften years of tension. But the moment you attach that kind of emotional weight to an event, you also create pressure around it. Pressure that can be used. And this is where the strategy, if there was one, becomes almost impossible to ignore. Because once the public believed the visit was happening, once headlines carried that hope, once Charles himself reportedly allowed himself to believe it, introducing an obstacle at that exact point doesn't just cancel a trip, it forces a reaction. It forces people to ask why. It forces institutions to respond. And more importantly, it tests how far they're willing to bend. But there was one problem with that calculation, a massive one. King Charles doesn't control the system that decides security. He never has. Those decisions sit entirely outside the monarchy, locked within government structures designed specifically to prevent emotional influence. No matter how much he might want to see his grandchildren, no matter how personal the stakes feel, he cannot override that system. There is no hidden switch, no private authority, no last-minute intervention. And if someone was counting on that emotional pressure to force a different outcome, they misread the situation completely. That this calculation didn't just collapse the visit, it exposed the limits of the strategy itself. Because when the expected reaction never came, when the system didn't move, when Charles couldn't step in even if he wanted to, the entire narrative flipped. Suddenly, the story wasn't about a family trying to reunite. It became about why the situation had been framed the way it was in the first place. And that's when public perception shifted fast, because people started connecting dots that had been sitting there all along. The carefully timed announcements, the emotional hooks, the sudden reversals, the way every collapse seemed to arrive right when attention was highest. It stopped feeling like unfortunate circumstances and started feeling like something far more controlled. At the same time, something else happened that made the contrast impossible to ignore. While one side of the royal story was dominated by leaks, contradictions, and narrative whiplash, another figure moved in complete silence, no announcements, no build-up, no spectacle. And when the world finally noticed, it wasn't because they were told to look, it was because the moment had already happened. No pressure, no negotiation, just action. And that difference didn't need explanation. It spoke for itself, because in the end, what's left isn't just a canceled visit. It's a question that refuses to go away. If nothing actually changed behind the scenes, if the risks were always the same, if the system was never going to bend, then why was the story told the way it was? Why build something so detailed, so emotional, so specific, only to let it collapse almost immediately? And maybe the most unsettling part is this: what if the collapse wasn't a failure at all? What if it was the point? Because when a story rises that quickly and falls even faster, it doesn't just disappear. It leaves confusion, it leaves doubt, it leaves people arguing over what was real and what wasn't. And in that confusion, control quietly shifts. So the real story might not be about a visit that never happened. It might be about a narrative that was never meant to last, only meant to land. And if that's true, then this isn't the end of anything. It's just another move in a pattern that keeps repeating, each time louder, each time messier, each time harder to ignore. And the next time a perfect royal moment appears out of nowhere, fully formed, emotionally irresistible, almost too precise to question, people are going to remember this. They're going to pause. They're going to ask what's really happening underneath it. Because once you've seen the pattern, you can't unsee it. And that changes everything going forward, which means the real tension isn't what just happened. It's what happens next, and whether anyone inside that system is finally ready to stop playing along.